now I join a new alliance to guard the Tomb of Space and find within its cold expanse the salvation of my race.
In 2358, 23 years after the Great War that nearly ended the Terran and Vasudan peoples, both races have continued working together as the Galactic Terran-Vasudan Alliance, or GTVA. The negative feelings gained from the Terran-Vasudan War prior to the arrival of the Shivans being gradually worked out through continued cooperation with each other. The GTVA decides to formalize their alliance by drafting a proposal that would allow the Terran and Vasudan fleets to be maintained separately while operating under one command structure, as well as the dismantling of the different Terran governing blocks and the ceding of their authority into the GTVA General Assembly. Delegates from both sides are brought to Beta Aquila and sign into existence the Beta Aquila Convention, often abbreviated to BETAK for convenience's sake, thus ushering in a new age of prosperity and cooperation as both former enemies look to the stars to build their futures together. However, not all Terrans were particularly fond of this idea. Having both their armed forces and their governance open to Vasudan influence was seen as insulting to them at best, and an attack on their sovereignty as a people at worst. Admiral Aiken Bosch, then commander of the GTVA's 6th Fleet, saw what was happening and realized that this growing dissent could benefit his goals and give him a platform in which he could see his long-held vision become reality. But of course, no one in the GTVA or the soon-to-be-created NTF could have ever predicted what Bosch truly sought to gain from the course of action he was about to commit himself to. On or around the year 2366, Admiral Bosch leads a military coup d'etat against the regional government in the Polaris system, and succeeds. He then proceeded to declare Polaris an independent state from the GTVA, calling his new regime the Neo-Terran Front. In a matter of weeks, the governments of the neighboring systems of Regulus and Sirius are overthrown, and their citizens swear allegiance to the fledgling NTF. With his support firmly in place, Bosch demanded that the GTVA renounce the Beta Aquila Convention and to recognize them as a separate government. Of course, the Galactic Terran-Vasudan Alliance refused, and in the next 18 months the GTVA and NTF would fight on a scale not seen since the Great War. Before we proceed further with the events of the NTF Rebellion, it's important to talk about why the Neo-Terran Front was able to garner the support it did, and how it quickly became strong enough to challenge the unified might of both the Terrans and Vasudans. In the aftermath of the Great War and the loss of Earth, an entire generation of Terrans grew up never knowing the splendor or grandness of their homeworld. This lost generation, as they became known, believed that they had no present, only a past filled with unimaginable horror, and a future that resided only in their dreams. Bosch's ideology took advantage of this attitude. He promised to make Polaris a utopia that would recapture the glory of their lost homeworld by forging it into a new Terra. Polaris, like in the ages of old, would be the guiding star that would lead humanity through these seas of uncertainty and despair, and bring them to a future that was bright and prosperous. By using such romantic imagery to describe his plan, it was easy to see why so many flocked to Bosch's NTF. But there was another, far less picturesque reason why Bosch gained the support he did: hatred. In the Reconstruction era after the Great War, the Vasudans leaped forward in their efforts to rebuild, despite the destruction of their homeworld. The Galactic Terran Alliance, on the other hand, eventually disintegrated into independent blocks following the aftermath of the Hades Rebellion, causing economic, social, and political chaos for years and stunting the Terrans' ability to recover. But as the Vasudans' miraculous recovery grew under the visionary leadership of their emperor, it had the side effect of breeding resentment in the Terran worlds, which inevitably evolved into full-on anti-Vasudan ideology. This sentiment festered strongly in the systems that would eventually join the NTF, as they had been hit hardest in the fall of the Terran Alliance. Admiral Bosch played on these sentiments in his propaganda campaigns to draw on the support he needed. These two factors were perhaps the most significant in Admiral Bosch's rise to power. In a relatively short amount of time, Bosch had the means to bring his public vision of Neo-Terra into reality. After 18 months of bloody fighting, the Neo-Terran Front was on the verge of success. The Alliance-held system of Epsilon Pegasi fell to the rebels, and a two-pronged attack by GTVA forces in Sirius was utterly decimated. The losses to men and materiel, and now territory, were becoming so severe that the GTVA was beginning to consider ceding to the NTF's demands and recognize their authority as an independent entity. But the Galactic Terran Vasudan Alliance had one last, colossal trump card to play. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. The GTVA had a closely guarded secret they kept since 2345. In that year, Emperor Khonsu II of the Vasudan Empire announced a joint endeavor for the mutual defense of both Vasudan and Terran peoples. The GTVA Colossus. The Colossus would be the largest spacefaring warship ever constructed, dwarfing even the Lucifer in size 12 times over, and wielding enough firepower to outgun 5 Orion-class destroyers combined, along with over 60 fighter and bomber wings. With the fall of Epsilon Pegasi, the GTVA Colossus was finally authorized for her first combat operation. Her debut would be during the battle for NF Station, one of the last holdouts in Epsilon Pegasi. While the station's fighter pilots bravely held off the persistent NTF, the rebels were determined to crush the last major Alliance presence in the system. Jumping in mid-battle, the Colossus announced herself to the universe in a barrage of energy beams, missiles, and laser projectiles, easily sweeping aside the NTF attackers as if they were nothing. What followed after was an abrupt reversal of fortune for the GTVA. Led by the Colossus, Alliance forces began to retake Epsilon Pegasi and drive out the NTF from the system. The Neo-Terrans simply did not have any means to counter the Colossus or even begin to match its firepower. This was most effectively demonstrated when GTVA forces ambushed NTF Admiral Koff's flagship, the NTD Repulse. Now, the Repulse was an Orion-class destroyer, one of the biggest and most well-armed capital ships in the Terran Navy for over 30 years. Even the newer Hecate class cannot match it in a straight-up capship versus capship duel. But when the Colossus jumped in to attack the Repulse, she cut through her bulkheads like a hot knife through butter. The Repulse had no chance in a one-on-one duel. In a final desperate move, Koth ordered his crew to ram their ship into the Colossus, but even this action had no chance of success, as the Colossus poured enough beam energy into the Repulse to utterly obliterate the Terran destroyer before she could even get close to her monstrous enemy. Following this loss, the Colossus would move on to destroy the NTD Andronicus and the NTC Camisard, with the 13th Vasudan Battle Group crushing the NTD Cyrene and thus establishing a foothold in the rebel system of Sirius. In the face of these sudden losses, Bosch and his elite guard were forced to retreat to Regulus and establish a provisional government there, as the loss of Koth and the Epsilon Pegasi system gave the GTVA a means to attack Polaris directly. The war had begun to turn so far in favor of the GTVA that Allied command even went as far as to predict that the war would be won in 30 days. One would think that Akin Bosch would be panicking as his empire crumbled around him, and he would have been, if his actual plans were at risk. The rise of the Neo-Terran front was simply a means to an end for the creation of his true vision, the ETAK project. The NTF gave Bosch a power base to enable the research and creation of ETAK, and the military strength to raid Vasudan archaeological sites for artifacts from a long-dead race simply known as the Ancients. The Ancients themselves were a race destroyed by the Shivans, leaving only fragments of their legacy across the stars. It was actually through the knowledge gained from an ancient site that the Terrans and Vasudans were finally able to defeat the Lucifer super-destroyer in the Great War. Bosch understood the importance of the Ancients for reaching his goals, and through his research of them, he was able to further develop his ETAK device. His work on the Ancients also led to the discovery and activation of the Knossos subspace portal in the Gamma Draconis system, which led to an unknown nebula in Shivan territory. Much of the ETAK project was clouded in secrecy throughout much of the war, but it was discovered to be a device that allowed communications with the Shivans, based on old galactic Terran intelligence research before the Hades Rebellion. By being able to talk with the Shivans, Bosch believed he could form an alliance with them and usher humanity into a new golden age that would be independent of the Vasudans. But now, with the inevitable demise of his regime, it was time to enact the final phase of the ETAK project. With the remnants of the NTF fleet rallying in Regulus, the plan was to make a rush for the Gamma Draconis system, where the subspace portal to Shivan space awaited. Along with his followers, Bosch would enter the portal and fulfill his dream of finally being able to communicate with the Shivans for the benefit of humanity using his ETAK device. However, by now the GTVA were fully aware of Bosch's gambit and made the appropriate blockades at Capella and Gamma Draconis. One after another, NTF destroyers, cruisers, transports, and fighters were obliterated by the Allied defenders. Realizing this, Bosch makes a bold move with his flagship, the Iceni. Admiral Bosch would jump his ship directly in front of the Gamma Draconis portal. The nature of subspace travel made this incredibly dangerous, as they had no idea what was on the other side of their destination until they were actually there. Given the strength of the GTVA blockade, the Iceni could very well have come out from subspace just to collide with an object that could either critically damage or destroy his ship. But luck was on Bosch's side, and after a brief appearance in normal space, the Iceni was able to jump through the portal and into the mysterious nebula beyond Gamma Draconis. The Allied defenders were shocked at the brazenness of Bosch's move. Pursuing him at the moment would be impossible due to the deployed ships already being low on fuel and munitions by the constant rushing of NTF forces, along with some last-minute sabotage of the Colossus. The GTVA would not give up the pursuit of the rogue admiral, and would eventually launch an operation to bring the man to justice. For now, though, the NTF were finally and utterly crushed. Efforts could finally begin on rebuilding the shattered worlds in the long and bloody conflict. There was still much to do, but for the moment, the peoples of the GTVA believed they could enjoy a hard-won respite from their trials. They could not have been more wrong.
What my enemies will never understand
What's that mean?
is that my rebellion is about my love for humanity, not my hatred of Asudans.
Ah, blow the rhetoric up somebody else's nose. Nothing but a power-hungry hypocrite.